Hi, everybody. Welcome back to a special episode of Capital Consumption Theory. It's been a long time. I'm here with Brian Winters, as usual, and Adam Withrow, who's running for congressional office for Colorado's 3rd District, and Katrina Nguyen, who's running for Congress for Colorado's 5th District. Um, Today we're going to have a very free range discussion about politics, UBI. Hopefully, it will be interesting. Um, yes.
So, Eddie, you're breaking up a little bit there,
So,
but
and
yeah. So we're going to talk about unconditional basic income. I think is something that the candidates are interested in.
yeah,
So,
UBI politics. I think today would be interesting to talk about um, uh, uh, how to get UBI enacted. I think that's sort of a common theme um, between the four of us.
Yeah. So I just have something to say. You know, there are many pilot programs going on across the US right now. There's this group called Mayors for a Guaranteed Income. And I believe there are like 119, don't quote me on that number, but 119 mayors who have uh, signed on to at least explore the topic. So, this is something that is being tested out. But since Adam and I are running for US House, I'm kind of interested in, exploring how possible, a federal UBI is, So I don't know if I have plenty to say about this and I don't want to dominate the conversation. So,
so
someone
for the
jump in.
record, you're in support of unconditional basic income as a
Yeah,
federal
yeah, for
program.
the record, I am in support of a universal basic income, but this is my thing. Um, all of the advocates for UBI that I've spoken with, they're so staunch in what they're asking for, and they don't realize that we do, uh, representatives at least, they do represent a wider spectrum, and that includes Republican voters, Democratic voters, independent voters. And if you look at Congress right now, if Republicans won't even pass school lunches, we're going to have to compromise on how to get a UBI enacted in order for it to happen. That's my stance on it. I'm for it, but I feel like we have to approach it in a different way in order to actually get it moving. So that's where I'm coming from.
How about
I
you,
kind of
Adam?
want to. I feel that way up to a point, but I also think that people a lot of times agree more with putting money in their own pocket. And it's much like how when we had our coronavirus stimulus checks, there wasn't a very powerful backlash against that. And so as far as can we get it passed, I think that's going to be less difficult. We just have to widen the conversation a little bit. The thing that ends up kind of biting at me, because I love the $1,000 figure. I think that that is super cool. And like Andrew Yang's got his project where they've been piloting that with people for 3 months at a time and seeing the difference that it makes in their lives, and seeing that even for people who have a stable and decent income, that's still taking them to another level. But what I'm looking at is when we have 330 million people, then we're talking about spending $330 billion a month. And so what's happening to us is we hit a trillion every 3 months, or, just about there. And so it's how to not necessarily get people to sign on, but how to pay for it if we're going to do that.
Yeah,
I think
fair
that
enough.
that really hits at one of the places where I think capital consumption theory is really interesting. And I think that it is like this sort of um, back of the envelope calculation and thoughts like, how in the world is that going to work? And I think right now there are no economists who are coming out very strongly and explaining this is how it would work, and it definitely would work. And that's sort of where capital consumption theory lies a little bit, because there is there's some very interesting things happening there that gets to the root of conventions of accounting of very root concepts in economics, like, you know, what is reality, what is the economic reality, and how do we understand it, and what does that mean? And so it's very common, it's very normal for people to say, like, yeah, $330 billion a month, that's 3 trillion a year. And if you look at it, and you know, if you just do a very simple, you know, that's, I mean, that's crazy, that's ridiculous, how could that ever work? And and you actually have to completely revamp the basic concepts to understand why that is actually not ridiculous. It would definitely work. And the thing that we're doing right now is actually heading us towards a cliff. Like, we're in trouble. Like, what we're doing is not sustainable. Um,
Well, the other thing is that by ignoring all the costs that go along with poverty,
yeah,
of higher crime, of worse childhood development, we're paying for all these costs when it'd be a lot cheaper to avoid the problems in the first place. And so the American Union plan is a very specific plan for enacting unconditional basic income of $1,400 a month, Adam, for adults, plus a third of that for kids. So that's enough to lift every American family up above the poverty line. Ending poverty is one of the three planks for the American Union proposal in 2024.
I think one thing that one part of that puzzle actually goes back to Keynes. So, you know, like, in a nutshell, prior to Keynes, um, you know, the idea was that the government should always be, there should be no, you know, borrowing. There's no reason, the government should sort of stay out of the economy as much as possible. The economy should just do its own thing. And Keynes came in and he said that that you can have this paradox of thrift, where everybody's scared to spend money, and if everybody's scared to spend money, then everybody else is not able to make money, because somebody has to spend money for you to make money. You know, your money in is somebody else's money out. And you can actually have this situation where the economy has capacity, and you could have more production and more prosperity than you do, but because of fear, the economy actually is sort of like smaller than it really should be, and it actually creates these problems like unemployment or underemployment, or wages which are lower than they really should be. So that
What,
actually goes back to
what,
Keynes.
yeah. So the
Yeah.
way I think we can kind of summarize this is the idea of balancing the budget, the idea that the government should only spend as much money as it takes in. And Eddie, correct me if I'm wrong, but your capital
Yeah.
consumption theory says that we should be adding new money into the economy. Capital consumption theory says put more money into the economy, spend more than we're taking in, and increase the money supply in order
Let me
to address these
let,
economic
let
issues.
me try to get there one stage at a time. So if you paid attention to, like, Econ 101, like high school, the way economists, the thing that most economists, 90% agree on right now, is that in a recession, the government sort of borrows money, and the government borrows money, and the Federal Reserve prints money. Okay. So the idea is that, in a recession, you do this, you borrow money, you print money, and you use that to sort of end the recession. And there's something unstated there, something implicit. And the implicit unstated thing is that if you're borrowing money during the recession, that once you're out of the recession and you have good times in the economy, the unstated implicit assumption is that maybe you'll be able to sort of pay some of that borrowing back, right? So that it would be sustainable over time. Maybe that with the Federal Reserve, maybe you print a little bit more during the recession, you print a little bit less when times are good. That's something that most economists agree on. And
We want to let the candidates weigh in for a minute and see if they've got any reactions to your so far.
sure.
Adam, you looked like you were about to say something.
I wanted him to go just a little bit further because I like where he's headed with this. And I do have, there's the issue of the dilution of the value of currency through inflation. And what happens is if we're adding more money to the system, the problem we have is we have this small little blood clot in society that found its way to suck all that right back up. And we've learned money doesn't trickle down, it vacuums up. And so I like the idea, and I hate the terms down and up to begin with, because that's not what it is. It's malignant or benevolent is what it comes down to. You know, are you giving or are you taking to society? And those of us who work give to society, and those of us who skim off at the top take from it. But it goes, unfortunately, because it gets vacuumed up, as we add too much to the system, what ends up happening is those same entities find a way to just suck that up too, and we're left with an even smaller portion of the currency in circulation. So
Yeah.
it's, you know, trying to find strategies to actually take those big lumps of cash that just sit there and rot. They're like scores on a pinball machine at that point. You know, the difference between 60 and $100 billion in your bank is bragging
Yeah.
rights, because
They can never,
effectively it's the same thing.
yeah, because
So
they can never spend that much money.
never. It's
Absolutely. Absolutely.
And so that's why the unconditional basic income, add the money at the bottom so
Yeah,
that you create a trickle up economy that works for
absolutely.
everyone.
Yeah. It's what we all agree
So
on.
Eddie, you're basically making the argument that we should be printing more money. Is that what you're saying?
Let me take a step back. What I'm
Okay.
saying is that in the standard economics, there's sort of this question mark that was left unanswered, and then at the same time, you have this thing going on that's happening, that some people would sort of disagree with, where you have this situation where the borrowing and the Federal Reserve printing is actually sort of seems to keep going up. It doesn't seem to, sort of stay in the middle, and it doesn't seem to come back when we have good times. And the what CCT says is that the paradox of thrift actually has the wrong idea about causation here. So they have the right idea about the economy, that sometimes the economy is too small and it should actually be bigger. You have the capacity, you have the factories, you could have more prosperity, but for some reason it's smaller. The paradox of thrift says that that is because of fear.
Okay,
Um,
that makes sense.
but
Yes, I understand that, and I completely agree with that theory. I mean, I'm not trying to, uh,
well,
but
we're
thank
gonna
you for
argue completely 180 degrees. We're gonna say that is completely wrong, at least one half of it. The
okay.
part about it being about fear is actually wrong.
Oh,
And we're going to say that what actually happens is that um, Ray Dalio has this really wonderful chart where you look at wealth inequality, and it does this thing where from 1940 you have a peak in inequality. Um, it goes downwards after the Great Depression, and inequality reaches a trough around 1970, and then from 1980 to the present, it goes back up, and now we're at the same place in terms of inequality as we were about 80 years ago, around the time of World War II. And the thing about inequality, it's a little bit like what Adam was just saying, is that when you are a capitalist, you're a billionaire and you have billions of dollars in income every single year coming in. There's no way you can ever spend that. And so it turns out that when you look at so what happens is that the people who have a lot of wealth, the capitalists, and I'm using that term in a neutral fashion. These are not like evil people or whatever. They're just people who have a lot of wealth. Their money is going to go into investments. They're going to be building more factories because that's the game they play. They like to build more factories and businesses. That increases capacity, economic capacity. But everybody else, 90% of the population, everybody else is in the other category, and they are actually the people who are going to consume the production. And if they don't have enough income over here, so if you have high wealth inequality, so all the income is sort of concentrated at the top, and the bottom does not have as much income, then you will create the situation that Keynes thought arose from fear. And it's not because of fear, it's because of inequality. It's because society has all this income directed towards capacity building, which is what capitalists do, but not enough income directed towards the consumer worker. And as a result, you have what happens is that actually presses down on wages. You don't have enough demand, and it creates lots of problems. And one of the problems it creates, like asset bubbles. Many things about the world today can actually be explained when you look at it through this lens.
So
But
these are policy decisions that Congress has made, and they need to be corrected. We need to fix them. So Adam, looks like you got something you want to add.
with UBI, so
It's the part where it's like theoretically, hypothetically, we want to say that these massive coagulations of money are supposed to turn into expanded capacity, but what we're seeing actually happen now is those investments are coming in the form of mergers and acquisitions, in
Yeah.
limited competition, in
Yeah.
having total market dominance, where what they say they want to do, and they say, if you just give me unlimited money, unlimited access to money, I swear someday my lifestyle spending will make it back to you, or my pursuit of more than I already have. The only way I'm going to keep doing it is to expand the capacity. But that's not what's actually been happening recently. What's been happening is that instead they're like, well, I could charge more if I just buy up all my competitors, if I am the single dominant entity in my industry. And
I just want to chime in here. I feel like the things that we're talking about right now, it's like, I think that all of us are pretty much already there. And, I'm hoping that we can actually talk about how we can get this stuff, get UBI rolling. And because I'm agreeing with everything you guys are saying, I'm not just being agreeable, but yes, I totally understand the inequalities in society. And I really feel like, I would love to talk to you guys about strategies, actually. I don't want to take over, but, I'm just, what do you guys think? How can we do this realistically, and how can people who are not UBI people get on? I mean, I guess sharing what you were sharing, that is how you get people on board. But strategy wise, how do we get people on board? Because this is taxpayer money, basically,
Yeah.
So
Katrina, let's do that. Let me just make one final point and try to wrap up the original question in a little bow, and then we can move on to that. And the original question was, if you've got this $3 trillion a year thing in the regular accounting, that looks like really crazy. That looks like it doubles the expenses. It looks like it looks unsustainable. But the basic reason why that is sustainable is because one, the capacity is there. And a very interesting thing happens, that when you send this income out to the consumers and they're actually able to spend it, what happens is the economy grows. And one of the effects of that is that tax revenue actually grows. So one of the effects of the economy being too small is that the government doesn't receive as much revenues as it would, as it could. And so if you fix that, you grow the economy and tax revenues go up, you actually get out of the problem that we're in, where those government debts look like they're on an unsustainable path.
So kind of
what
you're
corrected.
So you're talking about kind of switching from supply side economics, where you put the money at the top and you build a supply of products and think people will buy it, to a demand side, where give people the money to buy things and they will buy them, and the economy will take off from there.
Yeah, that makes I like you really did wrap it up in a bow there. I like what you said. No, seriously, I think that was succinct. That really I think people would understand that, and people could get behind that, because that makes sense. If you give people money, obviously these government debts, they're not really going to be there anymore. Things are going to grow. So yeah, okay, I see where you were going with that. I kind of got lost there for a minute. So
I love that. I love that you understand. Brian knows.
I understand.
On the into the ether, and who knows if anybody understands, cares.
No, for sure. I mean, and I saw it. It was like a visual thing. So
So part of the strategy for implementing unconditional basic income is explaining the concept to people, right? And you both, taxes raise red flags with some people. And when you're spending this kind of money, there's got to be some taxes involved to claw back some of it. And by doing it in a way that addresses wealth inequality, right? You give everybody the same amount of money, but then you tax it back in a progressive fashion. And so you lift everybody up, but still address that what did you call it, Adam? The clots of
Yeah,
money, the coagulation.
you know what I mean? It's about as useful as a blood clot in your brain is after a point where it's like, yes, that's good stuff, but it's all sitting in that one spot and it's causing a blockage, you know? And so I kind of view it the same way, where it's like, once a certain amount of money is allowed to accumulate in a single set of hands, it just stagnates, it just rots, it hardens, and it blocks the way for the flow to go around it. And that results in strokes and heart attacks in human beings, and it results in economic collapse in civilizations. So
I like to
So
think of
I kind of have a question for you guys. It sounds like Brian and Eddie, well, maybe all of you, are you for UBI for every single person, regardless of their income then?
yes.
yeah, absolutely.
Really?
Yeah.
Well, that's sort of the definition of universal unconditional basic income, and not just as a practical matter, right? We don't want a lot of bureaucracy. We don't want a lot of red tape trying to figure out exactly how much income everybody's had and whether it should go up or down. Simplicity is better. But from a principled matter, treating everybody the same and saying, look, we're going to give an equal hand up to everybody. Doesn't matter. Everybody's on the same page, because too often programs in our safety net get used because they divide people and say these are the people who get it, these are the people who don't, and then politicians love to pit those two groups against each other and make them fight. So instead, we draw a circle on everybody, every single American, say everyone is worthy, everybody benefits, and of course, the people who make the most money are going to pay back more in taxes than they receive in their unconditional basic income. But that's okay. Everybody gets the same amount. So yes, that's our position. Catherine, is that sorry,
Katrina.
Katrina, I apologize.
Just cat. Let's just do cat, okay?
I'm
Cat.
sorry.
I started that.
It's on my little screen, okay?
I apologize.
It's okay.
Katrina, yes. So do you also support universal unconditional, or do you feel like there should be some
Well,
caveats?
I mean, I honestly, I would support like the most outrageous, you know, giveaways, honestly, but I just no, I theoretically, yes, I think that is right. You know, everyone should receive, if we're going to do a basic income, everyone should receive it. But it's just, you know, Eddie said that, you know, because I'm getting into that mindset of, you know, God, that is just a lot of money, you know, and so I'm having to go back to what Eddie said, where, you know, if we do this, things will grow. So I think this is something I'm just going to have to keep chewing on, you know, and just say, okay, let's, because for me, I have to be absolutely certain about something and before I try to get people on my train, you know what I mean? But I feel like once I am absolute on something, I feel like I feel confident in my ability to persuade people, but it's just I don't want to. I want to be absolutely certain that it's, you know, it's going to be the right thing. So yeah, like I said, theoretically, it makes sense to me. It's just that's a lot of money. So
There's a thing to keep in mind. The US economy, I haven't checked the figure in a while, but I would say it's in the 20, it's 20 something trillion dollars is the
mhm.
economy. And if you look at capacity utilization figures, I think they're in the 70s, maybe 80%. I think it's around 80% right now.
Yes.
There actually is $3 trillion worth of unused capacity
Mhm.
in the economy, according to the St. Louis Federal Reserve, according to data that the St. Louis Federal Reserve collects and puts on the website.
Well, and I know there's lots of wasteful initiatives right now that are put in place. So it's like if you just look, if you got really critical and you looked at everything we're spending our money on, I'm sure if we ended a few things, we would have enough money and, you know, just kind of worked the budget a little better. I was talking to, well, I've actually spoken to a few people about this. I have some ideas for fundraising, actually. They're kind of controversial, but I thought I would run them by you and see what you guys think. Um,
Before you do, can we just
yeah.
come back to this number? And I think people are getting concerned about the overall top dollar, the amount of checks that are spending out. And I think it's important to keep that in context with the tax revenue that comes back in. You know, for example, if I if I gave my kids an extra $100 a week in allowance and then charged them $100 a week in rent to live there, then my income and my expenses would change wildly, but the actual end of the day cost would be zero. And so
Right.
if we're sending out under the American Union plan $4.5 trillion worth of checks each year, but taxing back most of it, then the cost is a fraction of the top line dollar amount. So I want to make sure people keep that in perspective. That's not
Yeah.
that.
And it's
Well,
important
and
to say, oh,
oh,
go ahead.
sorry, go ahead. Well,
Oh,
I just want to say as a side note, something that has been on my mind too is if a UBI went into place, we'd also have to put in protections. Well, we wouldn't have to, but I think it would be smart to put in protections so that people aren't overcharging for rent, overcharging for their services. You know what I mean? And so that's just another aspect of it because it's like, ooh, everyone has money, so that means I can charge a whole bunch. So this is just something else that plays on my mind when I'm thinking about UBI. So, but what were you going to say, Adam?
That kind of derailed me a little bit because that
Oh,
goes
sorry.
back into the cultural problem. It was such a valid point that I made me forget what I was thinking. We have this cultural problem that's exactly that. It's like it's there for me to take, so I'm going to take as much of it as I can. And there's other parts of society, it's why when I talk about living wages, I like to talk about pegging those to the consumer price index. And these things kind of go hand in hand because say if we have a federal living wage that's something that people actually can live off of, universally can live off of, and we tie that to the consumer price index at the same time, then what happens is by raising prices, we raise wages hand in hand. And if we have a program like that going on alongside a universal or unconditional basic income, what happens is those price increases now have a reason to hit the brakes because now jacking up prices just completely dilutes the money. Any attempt to move from where we're at right now, if it necessarily legally requires a raise in wages that's at exactly the same rate, then they can't do that anymore. And if we don't have a control on that side of it, you bet the first thing that'll happen, it's the same thing that always happens, is you give the majority of people a dollar and the people who take our money away will find a way to take two. It's what's happened every single time. And so by having a wage tied to the CPI, what we do is we hit the brakes on that. We set a standard of living and we make a permanent gain for people. And yeah, again, I lost track of my other thought.
No, that makes sense though. That makes sense what you're saying. Yeah.
And to me, those two issues kind of go hand in hand because when you have that universal basic income, yes, it is true. For those who have a lot of money, they may even just set that aside in an account for tax time is what they'll do and consider it to be, if we treat it as taxable income, which is a good idea, it doesn't even amount to tax relief so much as just kind of a little cushion for them. But when you hit the majority of the population, that turns immediately into consumer spending. Most of that is not going to get saved. Most of that money is going to find its way right back into the system and it's going to flow around. And that
trickle up
spending,
economy.
yes, that's what's going to create more jobs. And it's the same, it's why a living wage and universal basic income go hand in hand, is because then it's okay. Those really rich people, they're going to be just as rich as they are now. And even if their scores on the scoreboard don't look exactly the same, the functional wealth will not change in the slightest. The purchased impunity will still be present. All of those things that they enjoy right now, except for as they're competing, instead of being like, well, I got 360 billion and you only got 140, you're a broke ass chump. Now you're and I apologize, it's just what I mean. Now they'll be competing and saying, well, I've got 240 and you've only got 80. And it'll be the same game, though. Their proportionate wealth to us, as far as the function of that wealth, will not change in the slightest.
Inflation is a really common another concern or that's brought up around UBI. Brian knows back at the beginning of inflation of the pandemic, before we actually had inflation starting to rise in the US, I actually did an episode where I argued that inflation was a risk at this period of time, and I argued that before it happened. And the reason I argued that was because of the problems that a UBI would actually solve. So I would actually argue that in our current economic situation, a UBI is anti-inflationary. When you look at
And
businesses,
that's because you'll increase the demand for goods and services, so the supply will follow. And as the amount of goods and services becomes available, then that will bring down prices.
yeah, I mean, so what happens is a business is going to try to raise the price as much as they can. If they can sell, 100 widgets for $100, and then they can find that if they raise the prices to $150, they can still sell 100 widgets, or they can sell 95 widgets. Businesses will absolutely do that. They always have, they always will.
They
Like,
have not. They have not always done that. That is a relatively newer phenomenon. It didn't used to be that way. CEOs didn't used to make 400 times what their average workers did. That is the last 40, 50 years where greed has
right.
really because wormed its way into the American psyche, and this problem has taken off.
We're talking about something slightly different. I'm saying that they will always, and I stand by it, to the degree that it's possible to raise those prices and still have the sales. They will do that today. They would have done it 10 years ago, 20 years ago, 30 years ago. They will always do that every single day. But on the other hand, prices, they don't just keep going up and up and up without a limit to how fast that happens. And the reason there's a limit to how fast that happens is because there's a demand response to those prices going up. And so if they can raise their prices 50%, but then their sales collapse down to 10% of what it used to be, then they will not raise those prices. So it really depends on the elasticity of the demand that they face. And when you have a lot of inequality, what you end up with is a small group of customers who can afford those price rises. And businesses, I'm not like sort of hypothesizing, this is what Charlie Munger reported just prior to inflation going on, beginning, is that his managers were telling him that their businesses had lots of capacity, but they were finding that when they raised the prices, they were getting more profits. And the reason that happens is because you have a small group of customers who can afford that, so they keep buying. And everybody else, the 80% or 90%, they never had money. They don't have the money to afford the thing in the first place. And so when you raise the prices, they can't afford it, but they couldn't afford it previously anyways. And so you end up with a situation where businesses find it profitable to raise prices. But if you give UBI to everybody, what that does is it makes everybody a potential customer of that business. And that means that, if their prices go up or down a little bit, there's this enormous population that will say, whoa, if this is 10% cheaper, I can afford it. I'll buy them. Right. And so when you do that, the businesses will, react to their profits, and it will say, okay, you know what? The best thing to do is to keep the prices, maybe even lower them. In Alaska, what I understand is that every single year, when the Alaskan, I forget what they call it, but it's basically a UBI in Alaska. Every single year when it comes out, all of the businesses have a sale. They all lower the prices because everybody suddenly has money in their pockets, and the best thing to do about that is to lower your prices, so that people can buy from you. So that's why UBI is actually anti-inflationary in this.
I like that. I that makes sense to me. But what about housing, though? I mean, does that really apply to housing too, though?
I was
Yeah,
going to say
I
that's
think
because that's
absolutely.
what you had
I
hinted at
mean,
before. Because the demand for housing is sticky, right? Everybody needs a house, a place to live, no matter what the price is.
yeah, on the aggregate level, it's very sticky, it's very inelastic. But for every single landlord out there, and most of them maybe own one investment property or a few investment properties, a lot of them do. They can change their prices, they can raise their prices, but on the other hand, their tenant has to have a place to live, but they don't have to live in their property. They could go down the
Okay.
street,
Okay.
the
Yeah, that
apartment,
makes sense.
down the street, who didn't raise their prices $10 and say, you know what, I'll live there instead. The individual landlords do face elasticity. And with housing, it's, a place to live is a place to live. Like you can, people can choose, and they
Yeah,
can.
that makes sense. It's kind of like at this point, landlords and sellers or whatever. I'm not going to, this is not a general statement, but they can exploit people, because it's like, okay, you I'm just going to pretend, let me try to put this right. If someone's trying to find housing and this is open, they're going to keep it high because it's like, oh, maybe you won't find something else. But I see what you're saying. It's like, if you have that cushion, it's like, hey, I have freedom, I have options, so it's in your interest to kind of keep this fair for a fair transaction. So okay, that's making sense now.
And that, here in Colorado is only so true though. And you live in the Springs, and I don't know how long you've been there, but the way the homeless population there has exploded in the last 20 years, it is insane right now. And that's the difficult thing about a demand-driven economy dictating the price, and how that's been, the screws are starting to get put to us to an extreme level. It's like, I live in a slum. You can see this building behind me isn't exactly pretty. It just is bulletproof. So it's a nice place to be. I don't know if you just heard that.
It's a bunker.
Uh,
You live in
yeah,
a bunker.
we sleep on the floor because bullets don't go through brick walls. And that's the truth. But I'm paying about $1,600 a month for this piece of crap. And this same thing 20 years ago would have been 400, 450. And what's happened is they've just said, well, you need this. You have to have this. And so unless you want to go live under the bridge with the rest of them, you're going to pay what I'm charging. And it doesn't match. If you ever look at a population graph of the state of Colorado and then look at a home price graph in the state of Colorado and watch how one of them is this steady, slow climb, and one of them was until about 2020, and then it just goes almost vertical, where they got greedy, and the greed is flexing too hard right now. And that comes back. It's why, and it's somewhat derailed from the UBI conversation, but it's something that we need to look at, is the tying wages. And I hate to sound like a broken record, but having something tied to the consumer price index, because that includes housing. And so what happens,
Okay.
and it's difficult in the sense that landlords don't pay wages, or if they do, they have, very few staff members. But that because housing is part of the consumer price index, it means that you lock that in at a point too. And especially for those landlords that have their fingers in several dirty little pies. So even if they don't have employees at their apartments or their houses, they might at their restaurant, they might at their store, they might at any of those things. And so then by jacking up that rent, now they've got to pay their line cooks more money. It has a way of putting a clamp on that and setting an actual acceptable minimum standard of living that won't budge. And it's a difficult thing, but because otherwise it is, at least here in Colorado, you've seen it. I'm sure if you've been here long, that you're paying a lot more than you were 10 years ago.
Oh yeah.
And that there's nothing, the population hasn't grown in proportion with that. The value of the place you live in is not necessarily more valuable than one you may have lived in the past, or even than it was at a lower rate. It's just what they think they can take from you is what's gone up, and that's.
And so that's one of the advantages of unconditional basic income, is it gives people more options, because cash is fungible. And so two of the ways that I think that will address the housing prices is, one, it's tied to you as an individual, not tied to employment. So you are now free to move about the country and know that you'll be able to count on $1,400 a month for yourself, and plus a spouse or kids or anything. And you can choose to move to places of the country where the cost of living is cheaper. And as people decide to leave these expensive cities, that then creates vacancies, and landlords are suddenly going to have to compete on price to get people to rent their units. So I think that's one of the ways, by decoupling income and employment, it'll address the housing prices. And the other is just the very fact that cash is fungible nature. So if somebody's gets rental assistance or housing assistance now, and they're told, all right, you're allowed to live in like one of these three places, the landlords have a captive audience. They know that their tenants can't go anywhere else. They can't complain. I've seen this. And so by giving them cash so that they can compete on the marketplace instead, those landlords will have to fix up their units and offer better deals in order to attract tenants.
Yeah, that makes sense. It's just, I think a lot of yeah, I'm not going to get it. But I kind of have a question, and sorry if this is getting off track. Feel free to get us back on track. But I kind of have a question for Brian and Eddie, since you guys are really involved with UBI. So, in your experience, or if, in your opinions, are all Social Security programs remaining the same then, or what? I'm talking about like food stamps, I'm talking about, disability and things like that. So I'm kind of curious from your guys' standpoints, does that just stay as is?
I would support that. I would support leaving them alone. There's no
Yeah.
need you don't have to.
Okay.
You don't
Yeah,
have
I
to.
mean, I'm all for that personally, just because I know how hard it is for people on those programs to survive. I'm actually involved with a local homeless group right now, and I mean, I have been for years a homelessness advocate. But many homeless people, they're actually disabled and they receive disability income, but they can't afford to live even with that income. So yeah, I'm totally on board with that. I was just kind of curious, what your guys's approach to that is.
So okay, so the American Union proposal again is one offer, one plan across the entire country, and because Congress is incapable of hashing out these kind of policy details, which is why we can crowdsource the problem and come up with our solutions ourselves. But it wouldn't make any changes to any of those programs. But at the same time, you recognize that because you're putting all this extra money in people's pockets, that some of them are going to means test out of those programs, and that's good. Get them off the safety net and onto a safety floor. And in a couple of years, when so many people have moved onto the safety floor, then we can reevaluate and say, all right, how many of these programs can be consolidated? How many can be reduced and things. But first, solve the basic problem and get UBI in place.
Well, I have a
Yeah.
question in response to that. So you said that some of these people will, what did you
Means
say?
test.
Something about, yeah, about exceeding their means test. Are you talking about their monthly income limit for those
Uh,
programs? Is that what you're saying?
yeah. So for a family of four, would have a guaranteed income of over $40,000 a year, and so you might not qualify for some of the programs that people are on now.
Okay.
Um,
Well, I
and
just have to
so,
say, I just want to say really quick, I think for people on disability and, retirement, I feel like that shouldn't, well, I guess with retirement, it wouldn't matter, but with people on disability, it shouldn't, and I don't even know why I'm like trying to argue right now. It's not like we're making legislation right now, but I really feel like it shouldn't even affect their monthly income personally, because I mean, am I making sense what I'm saying?
yes,
Well, the
and
nice
Okay.
thing there is that a lot of different forms of disability income aren't necessarily tied to your finances. They're actually tied to your disability. And so those wouldn't necessarily be affected. And it's especially, when you get to like the VA disability benefit, even if you've got a job, if you're a disabled veteran, your disability benefit doesn't move an inch. And so it has more to do with number of dependents and things like that. And so that type of benefit won't change in the slightest. Whereas, and there are others, I'm not entirely certain how SSI works coming out of
I
Social
do.
Security.
I know about SSI, and I wanted to talk about
and
that
and so
actually.
so to answer your question, Katrina, no, the UBI would not count as substantial gainful income, substantial
Yeah.
gainful activity. So it wouldn't impact that. One of the
Okay.
other fixes that's in and we are making legislation because again, Congress is dropping the ball. Somebody's got to step up and take responsibility. So people like you that are concerned about fixing national policies, this is an opportunity to do that. And one of the other fixes that's in there is, as you know, there's this very low savings threshold for people on SSDI, right? They're not allowed to have more than $2,000 in the bank, or else
I
they
know.
start to lose their benefits. And that hasn't been updated since 1970 something. I forget the exact year. And
Well, and
so raising that threshold to the amount of UBI is one of the other things that will be fixed.
yeah, and people on SSI, I know a lot about SSI. They're given a ticket to work, that you can try to go back to work and still receive your SSI, but it's a joke. If you make more than $65, then your income is taken away,
Yeah.
$65 for the whole month. And then so it is horrible. And a lot of people who are on SSI, they just, for some bureaucratic reason, they weren't eligible for SSDI, which is, a couple hundred more. So I'm really passionate about those things because I know too many people who are suffering from, real issues, and they can't live,
Right.
so.
And so this is another advantage to the UBI, right? Is that it's a safety floor, and anything you earn on top of that, you always benefit. You don't risk losing anything by accepting employment.
I do want to say, like, from my perspective, from the economics of it, it's not either or. There's no trade-off. So if politically you have to make a trade-off, then you guys are all more into that side of it than I am. But economically, there's almost no trade-off. You don't actually have to, cut. You don't actually have to.
Because Eddie's more concerned about the consumption that's going on, the demand for the goods and services, and creating that in order to stimulate the economy.
So, Brian, with your American Union group, are you an advocacy group or what?
It's the goal is to influence the 2024 federal election. So it's a super PAC.
Okay. Okay, a PAC. Okay. And so I'm kind of curious, are you reaching out to many people? I'm just curious the types of people, the types of persuasions on the political spectrum who are open to what you are proposing. Do you have a sense of that at this point?
Sure. Like what are the problems that you want to solve in America? And for a lot of them, addressing poverty makes those problems easier to solve. Right? You talked earlier about looking at ways that the United States spends money. And one of those big things is the military industrial complex, because it pushes money out into every single congressional district. It creates jobs, it puts income in people's pockets. And so if you are serious about shrinking the military industrial complex, you've got to replace the way that money gets to people. You've got to fix that problem as well. And so UBI fills that same niche that the military industrial complex does in pushing.
Well, I have to tell you something, Brian.
Yes.
If you have chosen the right time to do this, in my opinion, because a lot of people, a lot of Americans right now are really pissed off at how much money are going overseas to fund different wars. And I'm not like a super like, but I mean, we have so many problems here. I'm not saying that, we can't be a diplomatic influence, in the world, but we are spending a lot of money, and a lot of it is not here. So what I'm trying to say is you've chosen a right time to influence this, with this topic, because I think more people are going to hear it, because this is something that's being said out there, and when I say out there, on social media, where people are wondering, when is the government going to support us? So I just wanted to say that. Would you agree?
Yes. Yes.
Yeah.
No, there's a demand for solutions. People are tired of broken government. And so, well, let me give you guys both as candidates. Let me ask you which is the ultimate question, which is if you're willing to take up the demands of the American Union and collectively bargain for a better social contract, so end poverty, end mass incarceration, and the endless wars, and the incumbents in your districts enact this legislative program before the election, would you agree to support your incumbents for re-election?
Okay, so you're saying if my incumbent signed on to
Not signed on to, enacted, passed it through
enacted.
Congress.
To be honest, if I weren't running, I would.
And so this is the question. This is the game we're playing. Instead of Republicans and Democrats, incumbents versus challengers. Can
Right.
the incumbents get this done before the election? And if so, are their challengers are willing to care more about results than about who gets elected? How about you, Adam? If your incumbent gets it done before the election, would you be willing to support them?
Now I'll tell you, what I'm running on is what you're asking for, and we should talk more in the future when it comes to all that, because I'm not messing around, man. And I'm just gonna turn you on to guess who my incumbent is.
I know who your incumbent is.
Yeah. So if pigs start to fly And when hell freezes over, then yes, absolutely. I will back out. I will drop from the race. I will fully endorse her. I will build a shrine in her honor. I will fall to my knees, bring fruit, ask advice.
But
I'll burn
and
incense.
but that's what America needs, right? Is you need to
Yes.
find things to agree with people on, things to work together with them on, and instead of demonizing them and trying to destroy them no matter what, come
Yeah.
together
And
around
Oh
solutions.
man.
And that's what the
I don't
American
I
Union
don't
plan
have
does.
a huge problem against our incumbent. I mean, like here, I don't agree with him on everything, but he's actually, compared to some of his colleagues, he's not bad on, just frankly speaking. But yeah, I don't know. I mean, go ahead and reach out to him if you want. But darn it, I had something I wanted to say and I totally forgot. But
So it looks like we got about 5 minutes left. Who wants to make final thoughts and
well,
pitches? Where can people learn
yeah.
more about your campaigns?
Oh, okay. Well, you can go to cat4house.com, KAT4, just the number 4house.com. I'm on most social medias. I'm mostly active on Twitter, least active on LinkedIn. I'm still a social media newbie. I was off for like 12 years. The last time I was on social media was MySpace, okay? I left when Facebook took over MySpace. I was like, I'm done. I don't want to do this anymore. And well, I was a MySpace and Deviant art nerd. And so I've been off a long time. And so I just got back on this year, just slowly building up. But yeah, you can find me there. I'm very open to collaborations. I love working with people and learning from people. So yeah, and yep, that's me.
And
Adam.
okay.
You can go to withrowcd3.com, and that's my website. It'll let you know a little more. It's best to kind of have a conversation. I have a pretty detailed platform explanation there. I've got discussions on a few small topics, but then I've got kind of a menu that just gives my basic policy priorities. And it's not everything, but it'll give you kind of a little bit of the flavor. There's certain things I have to be sort of vague when I talk about them because we do have a bunch of nuts out here and Christian fundamentalists and crazy groups of people that I want them to understand the results that I'm gunning for and not always my motivations for why I'm doing things, because uh, results is what people are asking for and not they want to put a partisan lump on everything aside from that. But yeah, you can either go to withrowcd3.com and check it out, or I did open a Facebook account because of this, because then you can actually talk to me and we can either have public discussions in the threads, or we can have private discussions on their messenger, or you can send me an email and we can continue the conversation that way.
Brian, are you on social media?
Yes.
Okay.
And American Union is
American
the
Union.
and American Union, AN American
Okay.
Union .com is the website, and that's our social media handle on Twitter, TikTok, Instagram. None of it's super active at the moment. We're recording this on November 5th, so it's 1 year until the election. So just starting to gear up for 2024 with the legislative package proposal.
Okay. Well, thank you for having us on. And if you ever want to continue the conversation, or, take it to another level, let me know. I'd be happy to come back on. This is just fascinating to talk about. And, I really want to get real with it. You can't just say, oh, I really support UEI, but it's like, we really have to get into, the truth of it. How can we actually do this? I mean, you guys pretty much already know, but we have to break it apart so other people can understand it too. So,
Eddie, you got 30 seconds worth of closing thoughts?
I'm just super happy that you guys came on our show, and thanks to anybody listening out there. Yeah, thank you all. Hope to see you guys all very soon.